Reach Young Adult Ministry Sermons online from Tuesday, March 30th, 2021 by Philip Jackson, pastor to young adults at Evergreen Church from the series Young Guns, entitled Daniel the Wise, from Daniel 2.
We are in a series of lessons looking at how God has expressed himself through young adults in the Bible. And we're looking primarily through the lens of spiritual gifts. Okay, we've talked about teaching, we've talked about exhortation. Tonight we're going to look at wisdom, the spiritual gift of wisdom. And we're going to look at one of the wisest men who's ever lived. This is Daniel, the prophet in the Old Testament. Daniel is known for a lot of things. He's known as the guy that spent the night with some lions in a lion's den, if you guys remember that story from Sunday school. He is known as the advisor to some of the greatest world leaders in history. His best buddies that he grew up with, went to high school with, or whatever, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they had a showdown with a giant chocolate bunny. Thank you to Taylor for that contribution. That is now part of our culture here, the VeggieTales version of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. But let me give you some background about him first before we get into wisdom. So the story of Israel, for those of you that are, maybe it's been a while since you've read this. So God gave a promise to this man Abraham. And he said, because of your faithfulness, I am going to bless all of the nations of the world through you. And what he meant is that eventually Jesus would be born from his family tree. Well, along that storyline between Jesus and Abraham, eventually the people of Israel, Abraham's descendants, God promises them that they will have a place, a special place where they can live and they can thrive and they can have as a home. As long as, in this covenant relationship, they saved themselves to be just his people. And so sure enough, God is true to his word, as he always is. And so what happened was that they settled in this promised land after many, many years and many generations of struggle. And over time, they began to be comfortable and overly familiar with God's presence in their lives. And so slowly and surely, they started to see other nations around them, and they started to envy them. They began to notice that these other nations had gods that they could put on a mantle, and they could see them. They started to notice that these other cultures, they had different practices that they envied because they were brutal, and they were a lot of their worship was sexual, and a lot of the things that they did fed the inner nature of our pleasure. And so the people of Israel began to crave these things to the point to where they said, you know what, if we can just be like the other nations, maybe then we'll be satisfied. And so they turned their back on God and they began to rebel. And one of the first things that they did is they said, we want a king, just like everybody else. Well, God was their king. And so God tells another prophet, the prophet Samuel, we looked at him last week. God told Samuel, they haven't turned their back on you, they've turned their back on me by asking for a king. And so sure enough, over generations, as they turn away from God, they drift further and further away from God, to the point to where they're caught in civil war, and they fight each other, and they kill each other, and there is all kinds of tribal rivalries, to the point to where finally God says, okay, I'm going to put you in timeout for a little while. And so we start to see other nations, other empires begin to conquer Israel. They come in and they begin to abuse Israel, and they take them captive. So what we're going to see tonight is we're going to see that one of the first stories that has come out of that period of time. So in the first, if you have your Bibles, turn over to the book of Daniel. In the first chapter of the book of Daniel, we see the story of what happened whenever the Babylonian Empire, this is the first empire to conquer Israel, when they come in and what they do. So common practice back at this time in history was that if a nation conquered another nation, what they wanted to do is they wanted to make sure that the nation that was conquered wouldn't rebel against them. And so they did a couple of things to try to make that not as possible. One of the first things that they did is they would take out all of the prominent people, the people of influence, out of the culture. And they would do that either by taking them as as hostages, or what they would do is, what commonly is that they would take all of the younger generation and they would pull them out of that culture and they would hold them hostage so that their parents and grandparents wouldn't rebel. So we start to see in the first chapter of Daniel, this start to take place. So the king of the Empire of Babylon is this guy named Nebuchadnezzar. And so what he did is he went in, he went through and he chose all the noble families of Israel, all of the prominent families of Israel, and he said, I want you to find all of the most beautiful men and women that you can find, all the smartest men and women you can find, and I want you to bring them back to me as trophies. And this did a couple of things. The first thing is that it held Israel a hostage. It held them at ransom, right? The other thing that it did is if he could bring back all of these beautiful trophies, everyone that came to his courtroom would say, wow, how impressive that a king would be able to conquer a people like this. These are smart, these are attractive, these are good specimens of humanity. And so these were trophies for him to set around his palace. And so 4 of those trophies were these young men. One guy named Daniel, and 3 other buddies, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. We know them by their Babylonian names, because the first thing they did was they changed their name. And so the first challenge that they faced was that as you come into that culture, they had to teach them the language, they had to teach them what to eat and what to wear and how to act and all those things. And you can go and read this at another time, but in the first chapter of Daniel, Daniel and his friends start to push back on the things that they're trying to be forced to do. And as a result, God blesses them. Well, what we're going to see tonight is we're going to see a display of God's wisdom through Daniel, this obedient young adult. So before we get into the story, I want to tell you a little bit about the gift of wisdom. Okay, the gift of wisdom is to apply truth practically. Here's some distinctives about those with the gift of wisdom. That they focus on the unseen consequences in determining the next steps to take. They receive an understanding of what is necessary to meet the needs of the body, talking about the church, God's people. They provide divinely given solutions in the midst of conflict and confusion. They hear the Spirit provide direction for God's best in a given situation, and they apply spiritual truth in specific and practical ways. Here's some way that you might be able to discern the difference between these two. Okay, so knowledge is different than wisdom. Knowledge is knowing what to say. Wisdom is knowing when to say it. That's one of the key differences. Is knowledge is knowing what to say, and wisdom is knowing when to say it. Traits of the people with the gift of wisdom that they're typically are sensible, they're insightful, practical, wise, fair, experienced, and they have common sense. Cautions for people with the gift of prophecy is that they could fail to share the wisdom that God has given them, and they need to avoid having others develop a dependence upon them which may weaken their faith in God, and they need to be patient with others who do not have this gift. It is a very real thing for those that have the gift of wisdom to hear the problems of others and to take that and kind of scoff like it's a small thing. Not everyone has the ability to be able to see right through a situation. And so if you have the gift of prophecy, it's very important that you hold it with humility. So we're going to start in the first couple of verses of chapter 2 of Daniel. And the first thing that we're going to look at is we're going to look at how the world deals with wisdom. Okay, and the limitations of false wisdom. Okay, let's start in verse 1. So our story picks up. It says, in the 2nd year of his reign, Nebuchadnezzar had dreams that troubled him, and sleep deserted him. So the king gave orders to summon the magicians, mediums, sorcerers, and Chaldeans. A Chaldean is basically a fancy word for wise men. To tell the king his dreams. When they came and stood before the king, he said to them, I've had a dream, and am anxious to understand it. The Chaldeans spoke to the king. Aramaic begins right here. And they said, May the king live forever. Tell your servants the dream, and we will give the interpretation. The king replied to the Chaldeans, My word is final. If you don't tell me the dream and its interpretation, you will be torn limb from limb, and your houses will be made a garbage dump. Whoa, okay. It's getting serious. But if you make the dream and its interpretation known to me, you'll receive gifts, a reward, and great honor from me. So make the dream and its interpretation known to me. And they answered a second time, May the king tell the dream to his servants, and we will make it known the interpretation. The king replied, I know for certain you are trying to gain some time, because you see that my word is final. If you don't tell me the dream, there is one decree for you. You have conspired to tell me something false or fraudulent until the situation changes. So tell me the dream, and I will know you can give me this interpretation. Verse 10. The Chaldeans answered the king, No one on earth can make known what the king requests. Consequently, no king, however great and powerful, has ever asked anything like this of any magician, medium, or Chaldean. What the king is asking is so difficult that no one can make it known to him except the gods, whose dwelling is not with mortals. Because of this, the king became violently angry and gave orders to destroy all the wise men of Babylon. The decree was issued that the wise men were to be executed, and they searched for Daniel and his friends to execute them. Okay, we'll stop right there. So we've got a situation. Nebuchadnezzar has a dream. And he calls all of his wise guys to him, and he says, okay, here's the deal. I want you to interpret this dream for me, but I want you to tell me the dream first. Wow. And what do they respond? Nobody can do that. I can't read your mind. I don't know what you dreamt last night. Right? And so all of a sudden we start to see that there's boundaries. There's boundaries for these wise men. Right? So something is interesting here because it can be similar with us. That God sends situations that the solution is completely unclear. Like we have no idea what to do. Have you guys ever been in that situation where it's like, I have no idea where to go next? You see, to these guys, they have no idea where to even start. So Nebuchadnezzar, look at verse 1. In the second year of his reign, Nebuchadnezzar had dreams that troubled him, and his sleep deserted him. So this guy not only is having crazy dreams, but it's happened over and over again, and now he can't sleep. So it causes him incredible distress. I want you to notice something here. As these magicians start to look at this situation, they're totally out of their depth. Here's a truth to you. Is that worldly wisdom cannot comment on real truth. Worldly wisdom cannot comment on real truth. Because the reality is that wisdom is rooted in God. And to be separate from God means that we are separate from truth. To be separate from God means that we are separate from the understanding and the ability to be able to process accurately and move forward. What's happening is these wise men have been presented with this impossible situation, just like we are in almost all the time. And yet, you know what? The one thing that is missing is a relationship with the Father. That's why they're terrified, is because there's no way that they can solve this. This reminds me, as I was reading the story, it reminded me of Proverbs 9:10. As it says, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, and the knowledge of the Holy One is understanding. You see, God's built our world to where our mere existence produces unanswerable questions. It is frustrating to walk through life because we can't seem to figure out what to do next. Right? And here's something that I've been learning actually in the last couple of weeks. Did you realize that Satan doesn't actually have to get you to commit sin in order to throw you off? Yeah. What I've realized this recently in the last couple of weeks as I've been spending time in God's Word and as I've been praying and working through some situations in my own life and helping others work through their situations, is that Satan actually can get to us before we're in the situation. Yeah. And you know how he does that? By helping us frame unrealistic expectations. So think about this. You're presented with a situation, and we create expectations. So it's a catch-22. We are damned if we do or damned if we don't. Because think about this. If our expectations don't pan out, well, guess what? Now I'm mad at God because He didn't do what I thought He was going to do. But if they do pan out, man, look at me. Man, I am so smart. And it feeds my pride. The reality is that Satan can get in on us before the sin even is presented. Because think about it, how many people carry wounds in their life, anger against God because of unmet expectations? This person who calls themselves a Christian has hurt me. This person who calls themselves a pastor has hurt me. This person who I cared about and was a good friend has hurt me. And as a result, my expectations weren't met. This relationship didn't work out. My expectations weren't met. I didn't get this job. My expectations weren't met. I didn't get this degree. My expectations weren't met. Satan has gotten in on us before we even are presented with a situation. And so it's very important for us to ask the question first, God, what is your will for this situation? And it doesn't necessarily have to be something that we could categorize as bad. Look at that. I just got a stimulus check. Oh, wow, I can use it on this, and this, and this. What have I done? I've set expectations. And I haven't even talked to God about it yet. It's true for every part of our life. The challenge is that Satan plants these seeds in us, and he gets us to track off course just by a little bit, to where we get into a situation and we've got garbage coming in and garbage going out. You see, God intentionally interrupts our lives to display the ignorance of the world and to really solve problems. So think about this. Nebuchadnezzar is at the top of his game. He's doing great. Daniel's finally getting, on his feet. Him and his buddies are finally getting in the swing of things. And all of a sudden there's this dream, this series of dreams, this cosmic interruption. Have you guys been tracking along? You're like, okay, cool, yeah, I'm on the trajectory, everything's going great, and all of a sudden, right? A cosmic interruption. Why would God do that? For this one point, to prove that the world has no solutions. To prove that ungodly mindsets and decisions and expectations have no real solutions. God is presenting these false wise men on a platter for the world to see. And we're talking about them even now, thousands of years later. See, what's interesting to me is that as I've been spending time studying and doing school, and one of the things that I'm doing as I've entered into the pastorate, I've been going to seminary. And I've been introduced to this guy. He's interesting. His name is René Descartes. René Descartes, you may not know his name. He may be slightly familiar to you from philosophy class. But this guy basically had this idea that if I could reason things out for myself, I don't need tradition. I don't need written things down. I can observe truth and I can come to it myself. I read this quote by him. I thought that was interesting. It says, "What is there then that can be taken as true? Perhaps only this one thing, that nothing at all is certain." One of the things that Descartes has given to us, he was alive in the mid-1600s, early 1600s, is he's given us the idea of personal truth. Have you guys heard that before in your culture? This is your truth, this is my truth, this is their truth, this is his truth, this is her truth, this is whoever's truth. He is actually the one that planted that seed, that there is nothing certain. This is what the world has to offer, a moving foundation for your life. And all these years later, this is part of our culture. So why are you in the situation that you're in? Maybe God is trying to prove to you that worldly wisdom is a fake. Maybe God is trying to prove to you that the answers are not within yourself, because as God's word says, as the truth says, your heart is desperately wicked and no one can know it, that you're by default going to make a bad choice. And the only way to make a good choice is to connect yourself to the true source of wisdom, and that is to Jesus Christ and to His Word. If you haven't learned this lesson yet, just wait, it'll come. The worldly wisdom has limitations. See, for those that have the gift of wisdom, just like every other spirit of gift, every other spiritual gift, God provides opportunities for us to be able to shine light into dark places. And that's what the gift of wisdom does, is that God creates these situations to show us both how limited the world's resources are for solutions and also to display His power. You see, false wisdom, notice these guys kept coming back and saying, hey, Nebuchadnezzar, can you give us a little bit more information about your dream? Can you give us one more detail, one more thing? Can you give us just a little hint? Worldly wisdom is always hungry for information because worldly wisdom is limited. But godly wisdom has things like divine perception and understanding because God knows all. And so for us, we have to make sure that we are living according to the way that things truly work. The second thing I want you to see is that real wisdom comes from God. So here's the situation. Daniel and his buddies, they're getting hunted right now. And they're about to get locked up and they're about to get killed. So Daniel, here's what's going on. Verse 14. Then Daniel responded with tact and discretion to Arioch, the captain of the king's guard, who had gone out to execute the wise men of Babylon. He asked Arioch, the king's officer, why is the decree from the king so harsh? Then Arioch explained the situation to Daniel. So Daniel went and asked the king to give him some time so that he could give the king the interpretation. Then Daniel went to his house and told his friends, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, that's their Hebrew names for Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. He told them about the matter. Verse 18, urging them to ask the God of the heavens for mercy concerning the mystery. So Daniel and his friends would not be destroyed with the rest of Babylon's wise men. The mystery was then revealed to Daniel in a vision at night. And Daniel praised the God of the heavens and declared, may the name of God be praised forever and ever. For wisdom and power belong to Him. He changes the times and seasons. He removes kings and establishes kings. He gives wisdom to the wise and knowledge to those who have understanding. He reveals the deep and the hidden things. He knows what is in the darkness, and light dwells with Him. I offer thanks and praise to you, God of my fathers, because you have given me wisdom and power, and now you have let me know what we asked of you. For you have let us know the king's mystery. So Daniel prays. And you know what? God listens. Notice that there's a process here for him to be able to learn what's going on. Look at verse 17. Verse 17 says that then Daniel went to his house and told his friends, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, about the matter. Where did this guy go first for help? He went to his community. They say that many hands make light work, right? For a person with the gift of wisdom, they understand the truth of God's word, that we are meant to do life together. We're meant to face these challenges together as a community. And that is a way overused term in Christian culture, is community. But the truth is that we have a lot of lone rangers running around. We have a lot of solo athletes running around in the young adult circles. And you know what? You're trying to find wisdom, but for some reason you can't find it. And why? Because you're not plugged into a community. I get it. It's awkward to get to know people you don't know. I get it. But the truth is that this is the first place that you're supposed to go when you need to find a solution for a problem. Together, to pray together, to seek God together. We just got back from Utah a couple of weeks ago. Something that has been astounding to me. Now, at first, as I was working through this year and planning out what we were going to do for our ministry, this idea of taking a social trip to another state came up. And I'm like, okay, that sounds kind of fun. That'd be interesting, you know. Okay, cool. And so I was like, okay, I felt like God was telling us to do it, so let's do it. It wasn't until I was packing my bag the night before we left that I realized that the list of people that were going with us had only been with us for a short time. And I began to realize, wow, 2/3 of the people in this group, they've been coming to Reach for a little while, but you know, I can't say that I know that they've got really strong connections and really strong relationships yet. Guess what happened? 20 hours there, 20 hours back. Taylor driving like a crazy man. came back with nicknames and jokes and memories and crazy stories. T-shirt ideas. Found out that Haley's grandma's a criminal. Sweetest lady. The grandma in the mountains. She's the sweetest lady. Turns out it is not okay to dump your trash at the Dollar General.
If you get caught.
If you get caught. That's right. That was her response. Well, I never got caught. Yeah, we totally got yelled at. I got yelled at by an employee. What are you doing? Yeah, not cool.
I got yelled at.
Yeah. No. Not good. It was embarrassing. Thanks, Grandma. Appreciate that. But you know what? When I guarantee you, if I talk to some of you, when you signed up on that trip, you were like, oh, I'm not sure about this. But you did it. And you know what? You came back with community. This is where we start to find wisdom, is with God's people. This is the first place that Daniel went. His life is on the line, so where did he go? To his people. We need to have people. My hope is that we would be your people, if you're not already connected here. Look at verse 18. The second thing that he did was he sought out wisdom diligently in prayer. That he urged his friends, verse 18, urging them to ask the God of the heavens for mercy concerning this mystery, so Daniel and his friends would not be destroyed with the rest of Babylon's wise men. Prayer. Prayer is an underrated thing. You know, we have a mindset that with prayer is just kind of like, I pray for my salvation, and I pray for God to take care of my problems, but we forget that prayer is actually communication with God, and it's something that should be easy. I want to challenge you. If you are intimidated by prayer, don't be. You know, you can tell a person who doesn't pray well in public is someone who doesn't ever pray in private. Because just like you're comfortable talking to your friends, you should be comfortable talking to your Father in heaven. Because He is the most accepting person. He is the most loving and caring person that you will ever know. And He wants to have community with you. He wants you to come to Him with your problems. He wants to come to you because He wants to give you wisdom. The disciple James tells us that if any of you lacks wisdom, let him ask of God, who gives to all men freely and doesn't hold back. Because God wants you to be wise. God wants you to be equipped for the problems in your life. So prayer is where we run to. And look what happens. Fancy that, God provides. And look at his response. I love Daniel's response. Look at how he praises God in his response. He says this, after the mysteries revealed in verse 20, may the name of God be praised forever and ever, for wisdom and power belong to Him. He changes the times and seasons. He removes kings and establishes kings. He gives wisdom to the wise and knowledge to those who have understanding. He reveals the deep and hidden things. He knows what is in the darkness, and light dwells in Him. I offer thanks and praise to you, God of my fathers, because you have given me wisdom and power, and now you have let me know what we asked of you, for you have let us know the king's mystery. I tell you what, reading these words of Daniel, this prayer right here, if you are anxious about where we are as a culture, print this prayer off and put it on your mirror, your bathroom mirror, because He is the God who removes kings and establishes kings. He gives wisdom to the wise and knowledge to those who have understanding. He makes all hidden things known. Our God is a God of wisdom. And He has chosen to speak through people like Daniel. The defining thing about Daniel's life was that he was a man of prayer. He understood that the only way that he would succeed in life is if he stayed close to the source of wisdom. A person who has the gift of wisdom will be someone who has a rich, intimate relationship with God. A person cannot claim to have the gift of wisdom if they are not a person of prayer. Their relationship with God is the central part of who they are. You cannot, if you believe you have the gift of wisdom and you are not spending time in God's Word and you don't have a relationship with God on a daily, intimate level, you do not have the gift of wisdom. You have the gift of opinions. And it's not a spiritual gift. It's hard to break it to you. A person of wisdom is going to be a person of the Word. It's going to be a person of prayer. So, what happens when real wisdom comes on the scene, man, the source gets magnified. Now, this next section of Scripture is a little bit long, but we're going to go ahead and read it. I know these are more verses than we usually cover, but this is just too good for me to leave out. Starting in verse 24. So Daniel has his answer. Okay, therefore Daniel went to Arioch, whom the king had assigned to destroy the wise men of Babylon. He came and said to him, "Don't destroy the wise men of Babylon. Bring me before the king, and I will give him the interpretation." Then Arioch quickly brought Daniel before the king and said to him, "I have found a man among the Judean exiles who can let the king know the interpretation." The king said in reply to Daniel, whose name was Belteshazzar, that's Daniel's Babylonian name, "Are you able to tell me the dream I had and its interpretation?" Daniel answered the king, "No wise man, medium, magician, or diviner is able to make known to the king the mystery he asked about. But there is a God in heaven who reveals mysteries." Man, put that on a... But there is a God in heaven who reveals mysteries and has let Nebuchadnezzar know what will happen in the last days. Your dream and the visions that came into your mind as you lay in bed were these. Your Majesty, while you were in your bed, your thoughts came to your mind about what will happen in the future. The revealer of mysteries has let you know what will happen. As for me, this mystery has been revealed to me, not because I have more wisdom than anyone living, but in order that the interpretation might be made known to the king, and that you may understand the thoughts of your mind. Okay, pause for a second before I get into the actual dream. So Daniel's saying, okay, the reason why you've had this dream is because God's got something to say to you, Nebuchadnezzar. He has given you the future. You are about to know the future, so pay attention. Okay? So here's what he's going to talk about. He's going to talk about that in this dream, there's a large statue, and it's made of different materials. Okay? And it represents different ages and different empires. Let's read these next few verses. Your Majesty, as you were watching, suddenly a colossal statue appeared. That statue, tall and dazzling, was standing in front of you, and its appearance was terrifying. The head of the statue was pure gold. Its chest and arms were silver. Its stomach and thighs were bronze. Its legs were iron, and its feet were partly iron and partly fired clay. As you were watching, a stone broke off without a hand touching it, struck the statue on its feet of iron and fired clay, and crushed them. Then the iron, the fired clay, the bronze, the silver, and the gold were shattered and became like chaff from the summer threshing floors. The wind carried them away, and not a trace of them could be found. But the stone that struck the statue became a great mountain and filled the whole earth. Okay, think about this in your sanctified imagination. Okay? How many of you guys have seen Endgame? Okay, right? Okay? When Thanos does the snap, and everybody just kind of just floats away. Whatever. Actually, it's sorry. You get my point, right? When a snap happens and everybody kind of floats away, picture that happening, okay? We got a tall statue made of all these different materials. All of a sudden, a stone comes, unprovoked, knocks the feet out from underneath the statue, and then it just disappears into the wind. Okay, so that's what he's describing here. Verse 39. After you, there will arise another kingdom inferior to yours, then another, a third kingdom of bronze, which will rule the whole earth. A fourth kingdom will be as strong as iron, for iron crushes and shatters everything, and like iron that smashes, it will crush and smash all others. You saw the feet and toes, partly of a potter's fired clay and partly of iron. It will be a divided kingdom. Though some of the strength of the iron will be in it, you saw the iron mixed with clay, and that the toes of the feet were partly iron and partly fired clay. Part of the kingdom will be strong, and part will be brittle. You saw the iron mixed with the clay, and the peoples will mix with one another, but will not hold together, just as iron does not mix with fired clay. In these days, those kings, the God of the heavens, will set up a kingdom that will never be destroyed, and this kingdom will not be left to another people. It will crush all these kingdoms and bring them to an end, but will itself endure forever. So let me explain this a little bit. So, real wisdom is going to magnify the source of wisdom. So, back in verse 27, Daniel is talking to the king, and he says, look, there's nobody who has wisdom to be able to tell you this. But then he points the king to the source of the true wisdom, which is God. He says that in verse 28. But notice something here. So let's talk about this dream. So what's happening here is that Daniel is saying, okay, at this point in history, remember, Daniel is in exile, right? He's a slave, basically. So he's telling the king, the most powerful king at this point in history, what's going to happen next. So he says, okay, here's what's happening. Let me break this down for you. The gold portion, the head, represents Babylon. Okay, this is the era of the Babylonian Empire. It is going to be established, and it's going to be fine, and it's going to be valuable. Okay, this is directly speaking to Nebuchadnezzar. And then the chest and the arms of silver, this is the Persian Empire. This is Cyrus the Great who comes in and conquers the Babylonians. Okay, side note, Cyrus the Great's grandson is the king in the story of Esther. Okay, remember the story of Esther, right? His grandson, Artaxerxes, is the king in that story. Okay, so the Persians come in and they conquer. Next you have Alexander the Great, the Greek king, the Greek conqueror. This represents the stomach and the thighs of bronze. Okay, and what's interesting is that as it goes further and further down, the precious metals, which indicate the prestige of each succeeding nation and empire, they become more and more unstable as it goes further down. Okay, so Alexander the Great comes in from Greece and he conquers most of the known world, gets all the way into Asia. He actually is the one that's responsible for establishing this overarching language of Greek in the world, which becomes the language of the Bible. So Alexander the Great, the Greek Empire. And then the legs of iron. This is the unified Roman Empire. So the Romans come in and they conquer all the Greeks. But the problem is the Romans end up splitting apart like feet made from iron and fired clay. That they were together, but they don't really mix. And so they eventually break apart. Okay, the final element, the stone. The unprovoked stone. The kingdom of God comes and crushes every empire that's come before it. And what happens? It grows into a monument. Look at this right here. In verse 44, describing what's going to happen. In the days of those kings, the God of the heavens will set up a kingdom that will never be destroyed, and his kingdom will not be left to another people. It will crush all these kingdoms and bring them to an end, but will itself endure forever. He's talking about Jesus. You know what? He's talking about you, child of heaven. The kingdom of heaven that you belong to is established forever. So you have this little Jewish young adult standing in front of the most powerful man in the world, and he says, there will come a day when no one will care who you were, because the real king will reign. The whole point of this story is that God wanted to deliver a message to Nebuchadnezzar. And that message of wisdom is that there will be a king that will come. We're celebrating Holy Week this week. We're remembering what happened when Jesus came and he gave his life for us. That we will recognize his sacrifice on Good Friday, and then on Easter we will celebrate his resurrection. Hallelujah. This is the story that we're talking about. We have Daniel talking about Jesus. Hundreds of years before Jesus even walked the face of the earth. You see, what's incredible is that Daniel doesn't take any credit for this at all. Notice he points everybody to God. He says, I'm not a wise man, but I know one who is. And as we look back from our vantage point, we see Daniel's words come true for the Babylonians, for the Persians, for the Greeks, for the Romans, and for us. This is one of the amazing things about Scripture, is that godly wisdom is always proved. Always proved. So if you have to take a stand for what the Word says, if you've got to take a stand for what God's wisdom says, your culture may tell you right now that you're wrong, but you know what? The future will prove you right. That's why we have to be people of the Word. Godly wisdom is true and will stand when tested. See, here's the thing about the gift of wisdom, and that it's significant because it's rooted in who God is. He is wisdom. Remember His prayer. And to know Him will make us wise. See, but just like every other spiritual gift, wisdom is meant to point people back to the King. And those who are rooted in wisdom will know that there is no room for ego. There is no place for what you want and your status and your placement. It would be very easy for Daniel to say, well, you know, it's a hard job, but somebody's got to do it. Don't mind me, I'm just wise over here. But he didn't. He understood that he is not the source of wisdom. A truly wise person will never tell you that they're wise. A person who's walking with God will never take away from God. So if you believe that you have the gift of wisdom and you are quick to tell people that you have the gift of wisdom, I would caution you to please not do that. Because it is a blinking neon sign on your forehead that says you're a liar. Remember, these gifts are not things that we possess. These are not tokens that we carry around. If we are not in an abiding relationship with Christ, if we're not plugged in with Him, all we're doing is manipulating people based on previous experience. AstroTurf Christianity is what that is. It's fake. The last thing here, notice the result here for Daniel's moment in these last couple of verses where wisdom protects the things of God. Starting in verse 46. Then Nebuchadnezzar fell face down, worshipped Daniel, and gave orders to present an offering and incense to him. The king said to Daniel, "Your God is indeed God of gods, Lord of lords, and revealer of mysteries, since you were able to reveal this mystery." Then the king promoted Daniel and gave him many generous gifts. He made him ruler over the entire province of Babylon and chief governor over all the wise men of Babylon. At Daniel's request, the king appointed Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego to manage the province of Babylon. But Daniel remained at the king's court. What do we see here? We see the most powerful man in the world get on his hands and knees and recognize the authority of the true God. Why? Because Daniel is a man of wisdom. Because Daniel is a man who remained close to God no matter what his situation said. Because Daniel knew and understood that the source of his wisdom was not his own intellect. It wasn't his own knowledge. It wasn't what he could do or what he could produce. It was his singularly focus on his relationship with Christ. And so for us, if we want to be people of wisdom, if we want to be faithful stewards of the gifts that God gives us, we must be people who recognize that when our gifts are expressed, that people will come to know God and they will be hungry to know God. And our place is not to say, you have no fellowship with Christ because you're a Babylonian king, you're a wicked person. I'm the one here that's righteous. But that's not what Daniel did. He turned the heart of the king and the heart of the nation toward the one true God. And there's other stories about Nebuchadnezzar where he actually developed a relationship with God. Hallelujah. What Daniel did here is he showed the most powerful person in the world the true face of wisdom. And notice what happens to his buddies. Now this sets up another story that we're not going to do next week. We're going to do it eventually. But we're going to do Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. But notice what happens to these guys, right? These are just obscure captives from Israel. And Daniel's request, verse 49, the king appointed Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego to manage the province of Babylon. But Daniel remained in the king's court. See, God placed Daniel and his friends in a prominent place to protect them and to make them an example to the rest of Israel. What God is doing here is He's using Daniel's wisdom to set up the next story, which is Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego standing in front of the entire nation of Babylon, refusing to bow to a statue. God is playing the long game here. And if it wasn't for Daniel's wisdom, his relationship with God, that story doesn't happen. This is what's at stake. One of the things about wisdom that you have to be very careful about is keeping yourself humble. Because it is very addicting to have people coming to you for advice. Oh, have you talked to so-and-so? They're so smart. They're so wise. Even the most talented person, even the most godly person, can allow that to worm its way into their heart. And so what happens is that those who have been given wisdom are given influence. They're given positions of influence. Daniel goes on, based on this heart, this mindset, he goes on to serve the most powerful men in all of these empires. He serves Cyrus the Great. He serves Nebuchadnezzar. He serves over and over and over again in halls of power. And you know what? God remains faithful. Here's something I want you to think about. If you are someone who has the gift of wisdom, if you have a relationship with God and you are close to God, I want you to think about this. Just like we talked about last week with prophecy. God has given you a role to play in His family. And when the time is right, you need to open your mouth. Because Satan does not want you to do that. Satan does not want you to share wisdom with people. He doesn't want you to share God's word with people. He wants you to be quiet and be still. Why? Because if you keep your mouth shut, people die. God has given the gift of wisdom to His people to give us guidance in uncertain circumstances. And to keep our mouths shut is a dereliction of duty. Because people die. And you say, Philip, that's ridiculous. Nobody's going to die. Yes, they will. And they're going to spend all eternity separate from God. God has given many of you the gift of wisdom. And the only thing that's holding you back is your own pride because you're afraid that you might look weird. Speak the truth. Don't be afraid. Be humble and serve the Lord. He's given you a job and you need to do it. Because without you, none of us will know what to do.
If you enjoyed this episode of the Reach Podcast, please be sure and like and subscribe to our content. You can find us on Spotify, iTunes, and wherever you find your favorite podcasts. Also, you can find us on social media by searching for reach.tulsa. Find us on our website, evergreenbc.org/reach. I also want to invite you to come be a part of our community. We meet every Tuesday night at 6:30 at Evergreen Church in South Tulsa on 111th Street, just east of Mingo. God is moving in the lives of young adults all across the world. He has something for you, so don't miss out.